Hello, this is Bunting, and namaste, because today we will be reharmonizing our crystalline chakra matrices in order to align with the vibrations of Gaian source energy. In other words, we're making world-based bangers. Let's play the track. Hope your crystals are ready and chakras are aligned, because in just a moment, I break it down bit by bit. You know what I do. You know me. But before that, I ask that you leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, because you see, and comment, because that all helps me out, and you can leave feedback on what artists you want to see next and all that jazz. But one quick note, more sellout time for me, right? You see at the bottom of the screen, I have 40% off all the stuff on my site, all the sample packs and whatnot. For Black Friday. There's plenty of free packs up there, so be sure to at least get the free ones. As well as you can get me for a private lesson if you're into that, right? And one more thing is I have a Patreon which you can support me and also gain access to all the presets I made in this video and the project file itself, right? Yeah. So it wouldn't be spiritual without peddling material goods, or actually digital. So I had to get that out of the way. But let's actually talk about the track. First with the drums. The actual BPM of these tracks, it kind of varies with Kalya Scintilla. I found a sweet spot to be around 82. I like this 80 range. It is highly slept on. But it's a breakbeat, you know? These drums are from, I think, my Waves pack, right? For the good breakbeat style, I often do something like this. The main keys is you want this kick here, and then the kick here, and then that. You see, if I take away all these other kicks, you'll see boot, cat, pretty basic stuff, and you can add the boo, 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 whatever. It's a drum pattern, who cares? I do, okay? Then I got a little percussion loop to give it that organic, non-GMO flair, which we so desire in this style. Right, you don't often hear straight hats, but you know, anything works for getting a bit of extra groove, any kind of top end percussion. But I would recommend digging through Reddit for sample packs, or if you're really into this style and want to make a lot of stuff in it, I would just get Contact, get a nice sampler, even though it could be expensive, because they use a lot of like samples, like choirs or like vocals and real life type of instruments. So that'll be a good investment if you're into this, but you'll see I had some workarounds. Okay. So you're going to be hearing a few of these kind of real sounding sounds. We got a little like koto type thing, a flute, kind of a handpan. It's real cool. And I'll start by showing you how I made this. And this is a really interesting, underutilized technique. I believe it's called like Karplus-Strong synthesis. And basically, it is a method of using these comb or flanger filters with just a quick little impulse through it, the white noise, and it gets you some very realistic sounding timbres. So I'm going to reinitialize this and show you how I make something like this, okay? If it lets me. There we go. Okay, so the first step in these realistic type of sound is to just get some obnoxiously loud white noise, right? We're going to turn it really quiet, and then we're just going to go straight to our filter here. Let's get a comb filter. I believe I just used this one. And you crank the resonance. And as you can tell, it's doing nothing because it's not taking our sampler sound. There we go. Beautiful, and we're done here. That's all for today's video. Thanks for watching, guys. No, that's not even close to it. If I got you for even a second, I would look inside. Namaste. But once you get this little noise, we want it a bit more dynamic. So to make that, we're going to take our white noise and just pluck it through rather than just sustaining it. You can sustain it to get some cool results, but for this like koto, whatever type of string sound, pluck it. And you see we're already pretty solid. From here, we're going to get some effects, but you can really shape the sound with these knobs here. So this blend here, it's essentially going to get more of these high-end resonances in and kind of shift it. A nice sweet spot is around here. I'll show you the exact parameters in a second. This cutoff, you don't really want to mess with. It just kind of changes the tune. But what really matters that I'm ignoring for some reason is the key track. Because now, as long as the key track is 100, it's going to perfectly tune this filter to whatever you're hitting. And that's pretty nice. You can also mess with this cutoff to make it more or less bright in a similar way. But really, like, you're about set there once you start adding some effects. Reverb especially is going to help make it sound more realistic. I like shaping this kind of EQ shape. It really helps you get more realistic tone rather than just like such a digital reverb from it. And of course you can add a little compressor to it. One other thing I forgot to mention, I should have done it earlier, is just a bit of release on this. And this kind of helps the whole thing to ring out a bit longer, similar to reverb. That release tail, it just sustains the volume. If you really want, you can add the tiniest amount of chorus for that lovely stereo. And maybe a bit of distortion too. You know, just basic effects to get a bit brighter, more polished sound. You could even like boost the high end, add a little scoop in the mid range, you know, just basic-y stuff. And what do you know? We have a little cool effect. Now, one thing I do to get it a bit more organic-y, non-GMO sounding, right? The joke's still funny, is I took this LFO, I dragged it to this cutoff, and it's bendy now. But we don't want it so bendy, we want it bending in both directions, not just one. And we want it going a lot faster. So that sounds funny, but we don't want it funny, and we're very serious. We're talking about aligning chakras. And you can change it to seconds too. That gives it a bit of that pitch warble, which is really nice for making it sound more real. You know, we're not, when we're plucking instruments or whatever, it's not going to be a perfect pitch all the time. But yeah, this is what I did for this. I'm going to show you the exact parameters and then show you how I made some of the other ones. So that was the general idea behind the synthesis. For the actual specifics, I just messed around with it a lot. You know, there's no rocket science. I ended up dragging this kind of brightness meter way back here. I dragged this cutoff a bit higher. And of course, I have this warbling still. But the real magic happens in these effects. So something I found really helpful was this high band on the EQ. So turn on EQ, click this. And I just cut the very hot top of the high end out, which helps remove some of that like noisy impact, since we are going to be messing with noise. One thing else to worry about is no, not that. Okay. But it cuts out that noisy high end, which makes it sound even more realistic. And I also low cut this because I didn't like how many mids there were. The mids felt a bit too dense, kind of muddied it up, and I like this more realistic tone. But yeah, feel free to copy the things one by one. That's the basis for this koto-y sound. So our next sound, I have this kind of horn, stringy sounding pad. And to get this string sound, I use very similar technique. One major difference is I don't have this envelope plucking the white noise. I just have it at such a tiny amount that you can barely hear it, but it's triggering this resonance. As you can see, I ended up brightening it a bit more with this blend. Pretty much the same everywhere else. No pitch shifting though. And yeah, pretty similar effects. Multiband always is nice. Soft clip too. A tiny bit of chorus. And bunch of EQ. Just to get a lot more high end out of it. Which sounded nice to me. One thing I did do that was a bit special was I took this LFO and put it on a low pass, which not only helps decrease some of this excessive brightness that I had to introduce for some reason, but when it's on the cutoff, it opens up slowly and gives it a bit more dynamic feel, like it's not just so sustained and so boring. I'm talking saucy. Okay, our next sound is a kind of hand pan. which we make with this very similar technique. It's really interesting how, even though it lends itself to stringy sounds, you can get a lot of different stuff from it. And also you can crash Ableton with it. That's how realistic it is. So for this patch, we still have the white noise plucking and a bit of release on envelope 1 for the volume. But I changed this comb from the default comb, whatever, to the band spread. And I also ruined everything in the meantime. Okay, it was the wrong one. It was actually the band spread flange plus. My sincere apologies. But I did a lot of tweaking to this. When it starts off, it might sound something like another string instrument. But we drag this blend all the way back. And we drag this cutoff down. So it's kind of peaking this second bit here. And it is very handpanny, very metallic-y bell sounding. You know, feel free to copy the exact parameters, you know, but these aren't all the sounds you can make. This is the ones I was able to get out of it, but this technique is really versatile, much more so than you would think. Under the effects, basic distortion, multiband compression, I'm cutting the highs a bit to get rid of that noisy impulse, and tiny bit of chorus. But this reverb is something to take note of. I mentioned shaping this kind of reverb's EQ. And you really want to do that because we want that ringy resonance, but we do not want this absolute mess. So we're going to cut a bunch of the lows and a bunch of the highs. I just want that main kind of mid-range impulse. Yeah. And that sounds nice to me. Of course, I turned up the mix and time a bit more too. Tweak it to ear, but I think this this main EQ is really slept on for really designing your sounds. Most people just slap it on and leave it, which works, but we are going above and beyond today. Okay. For our final Karplus-Strong resonance synthesis method sound, okay, for our final word salad, it's the flute. The pan flute, I dubbed it. And for this, I used not the flange plus, but the flange minus. I dragged this blend back a bit extra. I dragged this cutoff all the way down, and I had a field day. Pretty basic stuff. I went with a sinoid full distortion to get more of those fluty harmonics out of it, but it really just ended up making it louder for the most part. The most important thing of this patch, which I probably should have said first, but I don't care anymore, is we don't have a straight pluck, even though that's kind of cool too. It's almost like another bell sound. But we turn this attack up, just like a flute, because a flute doesn't pluck, you go, you blow into it. And for that, just that slow impulse. And what do you know, it comes with the white noise pre-installed because of this type of synthesis we're doing. It's just amazing. Amazing world. And feel free to copy exactly what I did and have a good time with it. Freezing track. And if you're having trouble with these sounds, keep watching the video, keep repeating it, because you have to be really specific about some of these to get it just right. Hope I did a good job explaining. And also, you can get all these presets on the Patreon as well, so you don't have to make the sounds yourself, even though I highly recommend you do for the learning process for your noggin. It's all about the dome. The next part, sorry we aren't at the cool basses yet. We'll get there, okay? Don't rush me. But we're talking about some textures. If you watch all my other videos religiously, which you should, not religiously, but spiritually, we're talking world bass here, you should know how most of these textures are made. So to start this patch, I just grabbed a random wavetable and I pitched it way down 12, because when you pitch it way down, you get this weird kind of texture sound, which is really good for textures. What do you know? And once you get this kind of textured popping-y sound with whatever wavetable you want, different wavetables get different timbres, you can put on this filter, get the 24 band, and drag this to the band pass, and you can just shift it around for some extra movement. And as you see, you can get different timbres for different cutoffs, twists. Yeah, whenever you hear that wow wow, it's often either a band pass or some kind of peaky filter. One more thing I did for some extra interest is I put on a warping mode smear. I turn that up here, get a bit more of a like poppy texture out of it. As for effects, pretty basic stuff. You'll notice this delay is pretty important. Get it super atmospheric. Multiband compression. I turned the attack and release down just so it wasn't too aggressive. Reverb. And I just threw on this flanger and phaser. It's honestly pretty important to the sound. They just add more layers of phasey movement. And I turn down the mix on this phaser. Yeah. And then we have another texture down here, which I'll show off in just a second. So this texture is a bit more traditional in a sense, right? In that it just uses our classic saw wave, our boy. Some pitch automation with the pitch wheel, some cutoff automation, and of course get that saw wave, put him way down for the pops to emerge. Similar stuff with the effects. We using the flanger, using the phaser, delay, reverb, and EQ. I use this EQ because there's a lot of mid-range stuff which can kind of stack up and make your mix sound muddy in the end. And also, a lot of the texture-y goodness comes from that high-end popping, so I'm just gonna scoop that, and I boosted the high-end just a bit. One thing I didn't cover is on this delay, I changed it from mono to ping pong, which is cool because if YouTube is working right, or if the stereo even works right on YouTube, you hear it popping between both your ears, which is better than one ear if you ask me. You can also mess with mid ping pong or just straight stereo, and you can change the rates at which they bounce between each ear. Isn't that cool? Great ways to add some atmosphere and weirdness to your track. Our last two parts here before this drop section, the sub and this vocal. So I'll quickly show off this sub. If you're not new here, you should know what a sub is. It's just a sine wave a lot of the times. But Kalya Scintilla, I don't know if this is in my head, but I feel like he gets an organic kind of sub feel. And it's not in any of the automations or any crazy effects. I just added a bit of sinoid fold distortion, which adds some higher harmonics. If you turn on this EQ, you can see it. See, and I think those higher harmonics not only are important to make the sub slap better and be heard on most more systems, like weaker systems, but it also, those harmonics make it more akin to a real life, like electric bass or whatever kind of bass one would be playing. So yeah, that's something to note about the sub. You can try different distortion modes. You can even draw in the harmonics yourself if you're crazy. And now this vocal, like I said, for samples like this, I would just dig through Reddit, dig through every corner of the internet, and or just get a nice sampler, which I believe is what Kalya Scintilla uses. Make sure you tune it around nicely to match your key. This is F minor, and my song is in E minor, so one step down, and it will be in E minor. Also, this Complex Pro with around the formants around half is going to give you the best morphing result generally. You know, you can morph it around while having it still sound half decent, but obviously a half step isn't going to make or break it. As for the effects, this is my weird vocal processing. It's already kind of processed without it, but that is not enough for me. I added this multiband compression preset on low amount so it doesn't get too bright. It just brightens it up, smooths it out a bit. Boosting around this range here. I really just go through with the EQ and think to myself, what frequencies do I want to hear more of? And generally it's up here, a bit of the high end, and I want to hear less of the mid range, so that's how I kind of shape the EQ. Some more multiband compression, which kind of messes with my hard work on the EQ, but I didn't care enough apparently. And a bit of reverb. Turn the quality to high so it's higher quality. That's crazy. But yeah, that's a vocal. Yeah. Now the part you've all been waiting for. These gnarly basses going crazy. And then after this, I'll show you my take on the arrangement of this style. Okay. So for this, we're in Vital. Well, duh, everything's in Vital these days, at least here. But our good friend, the saw wave, plus a heaping dose of phasers. So let me reinitialize this and show you my kind of workflow for this. So starting off with a nice riff with a saw wave, right? And in Kalya Scintilla stuff, you're going to hear a lot of formancy, like Wii morphing stuff. And what better way to do that than with some phasers? Let's just grab one phaser. We can turn up the blend to have more peaks. That's already quite solid. You can automate this cutoff on your own, but I'm going to just leave it to the randomness. Cool. And we don't have enough movement. If you're like me, you need even more. So we can add another phaser. Let's add this with more peaks and a different random. And because it felt a bit dramatic to me, especially with it all stacking up, I turned the mix down. So we just have a bit more subtle on the movement. Oh, and one thing I forgot. This phaser actually isn't doing anything because we need to route it through either oscillator 1 or filter 1. I'm going to do filter 1. So this takes the signal from oscillator 1, and this would take the signal from filter 1. Pretty self-explanatory. We can add a bit of drive to add some beef to it and some saturation to make the phaser not so transparent. Okay, so moving on, multiband compression, you already know. That drive is making it so beefy. You can have more or less if you want. But let's add one more phaser because 2 is not enough here. I believe this one I did end up drawing in some automation with. Yeah, so. Okay, very cool. Turn the mix down a bit on this as well. But something very important to Kalya Scintilla's sound and just in general for bass music is this low pass filter. Right, so I just use the basic low pass. I really didn't mess with anything from it except this cutoff. You see here it's sweeping open, here it's plucking, and this resonance gives it this nice. It's hard to hear, but it gives it this squelchiness to it. But moving the cutoff makes you able to take any sound and make it very dynamic and musical. You know, we can work this sound into the arrangement in a lot of different ways, different plucks, sweeping open. You can even make it a wub like this. Now it's a wub. Great. But yeah, I think the low pass is something Kalya uses a lot to take any sound, really. You know, it doesn't have to be this sound, and make it move, make it have a nice groove and rhythm to it, and just work in the arrangement. So keep that in mind, not just for this style, but for anything. And of course, we can add a bit of chorus for the stereo and a bit of distortion as a little treat since you guys have been so good during this whole video. But yeah, sounds pretty good to me. And you can add variations on this. You can try different filters. One thing I did end up doing at the very end was adding one more peak with the random, just in case the phasers weren't enough. But yeah, the Kalya sound comes from a lot of just peaky filters, similar to like Tippery stuff, I guess. Any kind of side dub. So a lot of psychedelic stuff relies on these filters and peakiness heavily, right? But that's the one bass. This other bass layer, which I have kind of doing subtle column response, it's also kind of in effect the way I have it reverbed out. I just picked a cool wavetable because what better way to get cool harmonics? You don't need to layer a bunch of phasers on if you could just pick out any wavetable. For this, I picked out the solar powered, not creepy solar powered. There it is. Okay. And I have it hitting one harmonic here, another wavetable position here. You know, great way to add subtle variation, shifting the wavetable. And I did a similar effect with this low pass opening, but I did add some delay to make it atmospheric, and of course some reverb. You know, pretty basic stuff here, but oh so effective, and I layered back some of these instrumentals. Okay, but that's the sound design for this. The question is now, how do you arrange something like this? Once it freezes, I will tell you. Oh my god. Okay, so that's frozen. My CPU is thanking me most graciously. So the thing with this style versus other types of down-tempo-y stuff like closey is in the arrangement, I don't think the bass line is as not as central, but is as like harmonic, right? I find in a lot of Kalya Scintilla stuff, he just has the kind of drum beat and the sub bass doing its own basic groove around like the root note. You know, this is just hitting the E, the triad of the E, the fifth, you know, basic stuff. Make sure it's grooving with the drums. You notice how bam, bam, bam. It's hitting with the kicks, which is important to a solid groove, I think. Okay. But as for this other stuff in the arrangement, you know, you can really add textures anywhere. You can have them hit somewhat rhythmically, like every like 2 bars or whatever, or every bar. Could be simple with variations. You know, as for the actual melodies, you know, write them around the key of E minor. Watch my theory video. You know, nothing crazy. I was just kind of just like writing little melodies, putting them here and there. I would recommend having something kind of carrying it. In this case, this is the kind of made melody, and this would be more a supporting line. And you could add something like this for some pad. You know, like, you can throw in a lot of different stuff, make sure it's consonant theory-wise, and it all has a good rhythmic groove to it. Because really, notes don't matter as much than rhythmic groove in bass music. Like, just look at rhythm, just look at techno, just look at every genre people like to hate on because they're just one note. But we like one notes here, okay? Okay, one thing to note about drops is that oftentimes Kalya, unlike a lot of other artists, he has his sub and basses doing their own thing, even like going against each other in some ways. So if I solo this, I'm still having the bam, 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 bam bass line going, but I really just wrote this bass, these mid basses into their own groove. And as long as that sub bass is staying pretty consistent and that mid bass has a really good groove that stands its own, it works. And it slaps. You know, you don't hear a lot of artists doing that. I don't know why, but it really works. It could be almost interesting to think of the basses like maybe like you would think of a rapper, you know? It's just about that flow and rhythmic interest, you know, while the beat can kind of be its own separate thing in a sense. Yeah, it's interesting because he has that kind of like rappery flow, like I said, but also it has all those peaks which almost mimic like talking. See, think about it. You got to think about this stuff. But yeah, you know, you can get this whole project file on the Patreon as well as with all the presets if you want to dive more into it. But as long as you have a slappy beat with a nice bass line and write some good melodies that are also rhythmically sound and resolve, just watch the theory video. I'm not going to talk about all that right now. You should be in business. You know, have some good sound selection. If you're really into it, like I said, get a sampler and you'll have a ton of nice instruments to build with beyond the synthesis stuff. And yeah, that's all I can think to say. Hope you dug this video. Hope you subscribe. Hope you like. Hope you comment. Hope you check out the stuff on my website if you want to support me. And maybe get a lesson from me too if you want to talk to me like that. Join the Discord, whatever. Just read everything in the description. I'm tired of saying this stuff with my hands moving like crazy. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions, suggestions, whatever in the comments, and peace out. Much love.